Secrets from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. We've talked to veterans, we've talked to parents. Now we're going to talk to someone who was a child in the when her dad was in the military, not when she was in the military. And one of the things he said to her was, when it's your time to die, nothing will save you. And until it's your time to die, nothing will kill you. And those are the words from Sergeant Major John L. O'Keefe that he instilled into his daughter, Kathleen O'Keefe Kanavos. And these words have shaped her life. Well, let me introduce you to my friend, my dear friend, Kat Kanavos. She's an accredited psychopathology and special ed. She is accredited in those areas. She taught psychology at the University of South Florida. She is a 3-time breast cancer survivor. I'm going to repeat that. 3-time breast cancer survivor. And she credits her survival to conventional treatment combined with her dreams that she used as a diagnostic tool. She is a best-selling author, an award-winning author, a radio show host, and an expert on dream interpretation. She also is a contributing author to the upcoming book, Business Secrets from the Battlefield to the Boardroom, that I mentioned earlier. And Kat definitely took her dad's word to heart, because I have never met anyone with more positive outlook on life. Kat, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Oh, thank you so much, Frank. You know, I always love being on your show. We have such a great time. We share so much information, but we do it in such a fun way. And I just love fun.
It is. It's just a blast. Now, Kat, you were born in Germany.
I was.
During a very tense time in the world. So what was it like being a military child living overseas?
You know, it's interesting that you should ask that, Frank, because I didn't know any differently. I didn't know any differently. I thought that was the norm. I mean, if you have something to compare it to, you'd go, oh, well, this is this and that is that. But to me, that was just my life. And fortunately, very little scared my father. And if he was scared, he kept it to himself. So I grew up not being afraid. And also, I think one of the things that was so important about my upbringing was my education and diversity. Everybody in Europe was different. They were all different colors. They were all different backgrounds. They were all different socioeconomic people. Everybody was different. And because my dad was a Green Beret, training many of the other special forces in the other countries, if he was going to be gone for a long period of time, for like a month, he would pack my mom and I up and take us with him. And so at one point, I actually lived in Holland with another special forces family for a whole month. And I got to see their life. And one of the things that absolutely amazed me, this was in Denmark, what amazed me is after we would eat dinner, everybody opened their front room curtains, their living room curtains. And families all lived together. They were a huge unit. So the grandmothers were wheeled in front of these big windows, and the rest of the family went out for their evening walk. Mm-hmm. And they all looked into everybody's living room and waved to the grandparents who were sitting in the windows that couldn't walk. And we went to school on Saturdays. I went to their school for a month. And in the first half of the day, they spoke German. And the second half of the day, they spoke English. And you stayed in the classroom for lunch. And the teacher ate with the students. And they all discussed family matters. It was one big family in the classroom. So I grew up with diversity. So this idea in the United States of, oh, there needs to be diversity. We are one of the most diverse nations in the world. We have everybody here. And they bring their cultures with them while also assimilating into being an American. And if our country were as awful as some people say, we wouldn't have thousands of people coming across our border. We would have thousands of people running away from our border as they were trying to do in East Berlin.
Right, exactly. That's a great point. Now, you were there.
I was.
1961. Berlin was a hotspot in the Cold War. Your dad, this part of your story just blew me away. Your dad was U.S. Special Forces, Detachment A, Delta A.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
Well, I didn't know what that, I don't know if you guys ever watched Sopranos,
Yeah.
the movie Sopranos. I remember this really stuck in my mind. There was a point where one of the children said, or the wife, I think one of the wives said, I didn't think it was unusual at first that we all went on vacation together. We all moved together. We all lived by each other. I thought that that was normal. Well, that was us, except we were moving from country to country and city to city within Germany. We went from Langries and Oberammergau, which was the language school, to Berchtesgaden, Garmisch, all over the place, ended in Bad Tolz, which is where Special Forces trained, the Green Berets trained with the German Special Forces. And from there, we went to Berlin. And from there, we went back to Bad Tolz. And from Bad Tolz, we went back to Berlin. And we all moved as a unit. It's like when I got into my building in Berlin, which was a beautiful apartment building, the people that lived above me lived beside me in Langries. And the people that lived below me had lived with me in Bad Tolz. We moved as our fathers moved as a unit. The families moved as a unit. So I learned two things right off the bat. As a new kid on the block, because I went to 5 different first grades, you had a choice. You could fight your way in, or you could make so many friends wherever you went that no matter where you went after that, you had an in. You didn't have to fight. You found your friendship circle. They greeted you with open arms, and you were a part of the unit.
Mhm.
And so as our fathers were a part of the unit, we were a part of the unit, and we all moved together, just like the Sopranos.
That's amazing. All the inclusion that was in the military. I saw that when I was in, and I was in the areas that you were, but you're accepted. You're part of the organization. You're part of the unit.
Yeah, and it extends to vacations. I thought it was interesting. We had a lot of vacations, and Special Forces, Green Berets were an elite fighting group. And so we were given privileges that I didn't realize military in the United States didn't have. We went to Garmisch and Berchtesgaden to the Ipsy Hotel all the time. Once every other month. We went for a week, and it was considered you need to go and become part of the culture. Whenever we went to Italy, every single year in the summer for a whole month, we went back to the same hotel. I didn't realize that that hotel had been cleared through security. I had no idea. I just went there. And since I went there, and this is part of our diversity, Frank, when I went there, I met the children of the owners of the hotel, and I was part of their family, and I would return as part of their family. And so I learned early that you don't go down to the street level where all the tourists were and all the pickpockets were, and it was dangerous. The families that lived in the hotel, that were part of that hotel group, their children would take me on the roof of the hotel, and we jumped from roof to roof to get down to the hotel 5 hotels down to eat in their kitchen, because that's where their aunts and uncles were. So I became a part of the different cultures, communities, and the food. Our fathers would go out in the morning, and they would have their scuba gear. They would go diving. They would come back with fresh fish and mussels and seafood out the ears, and they would bring it into the kitchen to Mama and Papa of the hotel. They would cook it up. It was free, and they would make money. So they were so happy when we all pulled up in our 8 station wagons full of kids to stay at that hotel for a whole month.
That's amazing. That's just a wonderful way to grow up, is to be with community. I grew up in Western New York in the Buffalo area, and we had 6 houses, and this were family, and 6 houses behind us were family. So I lived like on a compound, same type of thing. You were always accepted. It was just so wonderful. Now you said there was a red alert in 1961. Now, you were a child at the time. What was
Yeah.
that experience like?
Well, again, our whole community had moved from Bad Tolz, where I was trying to finish up first grade, to Berlin. And I remember saying, but we haven't been here that long. And my mom said, don't worry, Beanie's going, Mikey's going. By the way, Mikey became a Top Gun, and he was in the movie Top Gun. He was one of the flyers. So many of the children of special forces, they had their own stories by the time they grew up. They were amazing because they had had so much experience. So we moved to Berlin, and I loved Berlin right away. We were in brand new buildings, brand new apartment buildings that had just been built, which was good. That it was also maybe not so good because Berlin had been bombed to the ground, and they had to make housing quickly for the American military. They were not considered Green Berets. They were not John F. Kennedy's Green Berets yet. They were still a secret, Delta A, the A and D. So they were a big secret. Nobody knew that they were Green Berets or special forces. They were not allowed in Berlin, but the Brits had them, the French had them, everybody had them, and they tried to pretend like they were normal, but they were anything but normal. So we showed up, and the buildings that were built had been constructed quickly, and they were constructed with anything that was available, which was rubble. And there were a lot of dead people in the rubble. I don't know how else to put it. So the buildings were built with a lot of bones in them. And my apartment building in Berlin was the most haunted place I've ever lived in my life. For the 5 years I was there, I slept with my parents every night because there was stuff going on in that house. As soon as the lights went off, and it was so bad, the cat wouldn't even sleep in there. He wanted out. So we moved there. I was in first grade, and my mother said to Beanie, who lived upstairs, and we had Dina was downstairs. I mean, everybody who I knew from Bad Tolz was there. She said, take Kathy to school. I'm waiting for the household goods to show up. We'd been waiting forever for them. They couldn't catch up to us. And get her enrolled in school. So Beanie took me to school, and instead of putting me in the end of first grade, they put me in second grade. And so it wasn't that much longer. Remember, the wall, although the wall went up overnight, they say, it was gradual. It was barbed wire. It was some cement. And it wasn't really until we had just started school that they shut everything. The college students who had gone into East Berlin to go to the university, the people who had gone from West Berlin into East Berlin to work, they were shut in. They were shut in during the day, and they couldn't get back out that night. So people who were shut in that day, which was actually in September, that big closing happened, that was it. They were shut in, and my dad got a red alert in the morning, which had been going on for a while. And a red alert is when you're sound asleep and the phone goes off, and your dad jumps up, jumps into his clothes, and you hear everybody else's dads running down the hallway stairs, because we were in an apartment building. So you had 2, 4, 6, 8, you had 8 dads in boots running down the stairwell, getting in the cars, and the cars taking off. And they would have these red alerts where they were just practicing.
Right.
They might take off for a day, take off for 2. But this time when he took off, he didn't come back for almost a month. And we were like, okay, so where is he? And I would say to Beanie, where's your dad? She'd go, I don't know. Where's your dad? I don't know where my dad is. Dina, is your dad gone too? Yeah, everybody's dad was gone, and the mothers were very nervous. So I went to school that morning, and I got to school, and we were a pod is the best way to describe it. We were pods. We walked together as pods to school. There were like 5 or 6 of us girls, where there were 3 or 4 boys behind us. We were always together as a group. It would be impossible to attack one of us and not have 10 other kids jump on top of somebody and beat them to the ground. We were very protective of each other because we were told, you take care of Beanie. Beanie's going to take care of you. You take care of Mikey. You take care of Dina. You take care of Donna. You know, it was constant. Where's Donna? And that's where I got my name Kat, because the Germans couldn't make the TH sound for Kathy. So I became Kat. Wo ist die Kathi? Wo ist die Kathi? Wo ist die Kat? And everybody watched everybody's kids. It was a community. So our dads disappeared. We went to school. No sooner had we sat down than we were told over the intercom to go home. We're like, oh, yes, yes. We go home. I'm on the way home and I see MPs with big pet dogs shooting them outside. And I said, okay, this is not good. Something's really wrong. And I ran home at that point. I wasn't walking anymore. I ran home and I ran into my mom and I said, Mom, the MPs are shooting dogs. And she said, I know. We have to leave. We have to leave now. And we can't take anything with us. We can't take a suitcase. We can't take our clothes. We're going to sit in the hallway with the other families and wait for the truck to come and get us. We have to leave our cars. Now, another perk for being special forces or elite military is the whole basement of our building were units for domestic help. So I had a nanny and she had been in Dachau and she had the number tattooed on her arm, and she had come from a very wealthy family and she was the only one who was left. And when she got out of Dachau, she had buried some of her jewelry, the only thing that was left. And when she dug it up, she brought me a ring, which I still have to this day. And so she's taught me to speak, read and write German. And she was downstairs. They had to evacuate out of the basement for security reasons. And they were out sitting on the front of our cars so that we could not get into our cars and drive away, because they knew that if we left, they were going to be overrun and chances are they would be shot. So they were scared to death. All of the West Germans were down in our parking lots, walking around with their families, with their children, so we'd see them. And they were sitting on our cars holding their babies. And I looked down and I said, but Tante Marta's down there. And my mom said, she can't come with us. And I said, what do you mean she can't come with us? She said, we can't take anything, including your hamster Chippy, who was my only little friend. I had a little tiny hamster named Chippy. She said, we have to let Chippy go in the Grunewald back behind our building. And I said, it's going to be winter. It's like September. No, because Berlin is very cold. It's very far up north. It's freezing. We're not talking Bavaria anymore. We're talking freezing cold. And she said, no, the neighbors down the street, let the cats go. So-and-so, let their rabbits go. We have to let Chippy go. Beanie let all of Chippy's brothers and sisters go in the woods. And I thought, no, I'm not letting Chippy go. So I sewed him up in my pocket with some lettuce and a piece of carrot, sat in the hallway with all the other families waiting to be evacuated. And they're going, what's that smell? Did Kathy wet her pants? What's that smell? And I'm like, no, it's that baby over there. It's got a wet diaper. It's got a bad diaper. Because Chippy had eaten everything and he was going to the bathroom in my coat pocket. So we had to end up throwing my coat away. But I kept Chippy. And after about 8 hours of sitting in the stairwell, we were given the all clear and we went back into our houses, and the West Germans left because my dad had actually dug tunnels underneath the concrete walls. He was trying to bring as many of the students back as possible because their parents were rioting and the Russians were going to shoot them. If their parents, the German parents, were like, we're going to rip this wall down, we're coming through, we're going to get our kids. So the German army and the German police actually turned the honey wagons on them. And the honey wagons were all of the manure from the farms that went in the honey wagons that they would spray. They turned them on the people to keep them from being shot, because the Russians and the East Germans were up there on the wall with machine guns and dogs. So in the end, after about a month, what my dad had done was build tunnels to get the students back, as many as possible, and count Russian tanks, because the Russian tanks had lined up along the wall too. And he called all that information back from a bar in East Germany, speaking perfect German. He and his buddy, they always traveled in buddies.
Correct.
Yeah, they would sit in there and drink beer, count the number of Russian soldiers that came into the bar, because that's where they would go, And then finally he came home along with all the other fathers.
Wow. What a story. And you were like all of 6.
Yes.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. You told me you had taken you were going to become a U.S. citizen, and so you had to go back to your place of birth, correct? So you take a train through East Berlin. What did you see when you went into East Berlin?
Well, it was interesting that you should ask that, because we would get on the train. My favorite was the British train because I loved high tea. They would have a high tea on the train. It was a beautiful train. And it was the one that Queen Elizabeth II, who just died, would travel on to come into West Berlin for her birthday. We would always be invited to her birthday celebration, which was huge. And so we would take that train through the Soviet Union part of it, the Russians, into the other side of Berlin. And then I had to return to Frankfurt, where I was born. And at the time, my brother, he was more than 20 years older than me, he was like a second father, he was stationed in Frankfurt. So we would go and stay with my brother. And after the red alert and the wall went up in Berlin, because I was blonde, blue-eyed, and I spoke perfect German, could read and write it, and my parents both had no family. My mother was raised in a convent. My father was raised by the brothers. They lost their parents very early in life. They had no extended family at all. I would be confiscated, most likely, by the Germans or the East Germans if Berlin was overrun, because I would be a prize to them. With a dual citizenship. So my parents decided that I needed to just be an American. So we were in Frankfurt. From Berlin, we went into Frankfurt. And when we would pass through, it was an overnight train. You had to give the conductor your passports. Well, if you wanted to get through quicker, you filled your passport with chewing gum or cigarettes if you had them. Nobody in our family smoked, but my mom would get packets of cigarettes and she would rubber band them to our passports and give them to the conductor. He'd keep most of the cigarettes, hand them out to the East Germans and the chewing gum, then we would just breeze right through. And I remember one time we were just sitting there in East Berlin waiting, and it was a long wait, and I'm thinking, gosh, whoever else is on this train didn't give them the chewing gum and the cigarettes. They don't know it yet. But there was a very young Russian soldier who was walking along the side of the train. He had a dog. He had a German Shepherd with him. He had his gun on his shoulder, and he was looking up at us. And I remember we were not allowed to pull the windows down, but I did anyhow. I just cracked it a little ways, and I took this chewing gum and I just threw the chewing gum over. And he looked at me, and I thought, okay, he's either going to shoot me, sick that big dog on me, or just ignore the gum until we leave. Well, he walked over to the gum kind of sideways, stepped on it, looked all around, bent down and picked the gum up, put it in his pocket and walked on. And then the train started to leave shortly after that. I threw like 5 pieces of gum out. He must have taken it and shared some of it. But when we got to Frankfurt, my mother was really nervous. And I thought, okay, what now? Why is she so nervous now? And she said, today we have to go, and you're going to be only an American citizen. You're not going to be a dual citizen anymore, because it's really important to us that you do that. And I had on my Sunday dress. I had on my brand new shoes. And in Berlin, I took ballet and tap dance. And she said, when you get in front of the judge, you only speak English. Even when he speaks German to you, you answer in English. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if he speaks German to me and I answer in English, he's going to know I know German. But I didn't say anything because my mom was really nervous. And she said, you have to be able to say your Pledge of Allegiance, remember that? And God bless America and all of this. And you're going to have to get up in front of him alone. I'll be over on the side, but you can do this. I'm thinking, sure, I can. So we get to court, and I'm the only child in there, and it's full of people, a lot of noise. and there's a judge in there. He's up higher than everybody else. And I have to go in front of him all by myself and stand there. And he said to me, "Why do you want to be an American citizen?" And I said, "Because I'm an American." And he said, "But you are a German too." And I said, "I want to be an American." He said, "Show me why you want to be an American." And he said, "You're German too in German." And I answered, "But I want to be an American." And I could just feel my mom's eyes drilling me through the back of my head. And he said, "Show me why you want to be an American." So I did God Bless America to tap dancing in the place, because I had on my tap dance shoes. They were so pretty. And I tap danced to it and everything. And then I stood in front of him. He burst out laughing and the whole place started clapping. And I got my American citizenship. And my mom, walking back, said, "Did you have to tap dance?" And I said, "Well, he said, show me." And I wanted to make sure I showed him. And she just laughed. And my brother was howling at home. He was just howling at the dinner table. "You tap danced all the time?" "Yeah, I did. And now I'm just an American."
It's an amazing story. Because everybody's panicked and the young child says, "Hey, I can do this. Watch."
Yeah.
It is wild. So you finally get back to the United States. You finally get back. You're in North Carolina, I believe. And your dad and your brother, after all that ordeal, get orders to go to Vietnam.
Mhm.
What did that mean? You're a little bit older then. What did that mean to you? What impact did it have on your mom?
Again, our fathers all got orders at the same time. And so we all moved back to the United States. And many of us, this was the first time we'd ever been in the United States. I'd never been here before. So it was a bit of a culture shock because it was in Fayetteville, North Carolina, home of the Green Berets.
Right.
And the fathers all got together and they found homes that were close to each other in an area called Loch Lomond. And many of the fathers were Irish or Celtic descent. So Loch Lomond, they really liked that. So we all of us, after going to Italy together on vacations and living together in different cities in Europe, all were now in the United States together. And so the mothers had each other to depend on. And one of the things to this day that just I can feel my blood pressure going up is seeing a green sedan come down any street, because usually there were military in there that were going to knock on somebody's door and say, "Your dad's not coming home," or "Your husband's not coming home." So when we would see that car, we would run. No matter what we were doing, we dropped it. We would run home and say, "The car is coming." And right away, the women would be out to run to whatever house the car parked at to help that family. So we had each other. We still had each other. And when your father was given orders to go to Vietnam, you had to move off of the military base, which was news to us, and it was new to us because now we were in the civilian world in the United States. And it was the first time I saw how the military lived that were not elite special forces. They had a very different life here in the United States, a very different life. But again, it opened up my eyes. So my brother came back. My father took off to Vietnam, left us there with the rest of the families. And he was on search. I didn't realize this until somebody showed up at our door. But he didn't even have a base. Like he wasn't at base camp C or base camp Delta or base camp Alpha. He was on search and destroy missions with the Montagnards. And he had a Chinese battalion. And he didn't speak Chinese. So he had to depend on the Chinese officers who spoke English to help him run that battalion. So he would wait until somebody was shot down, somebody was lost, there had been an attack, and then his job was to go and find the VC, the Viet Cong, and any American soldiers that were missing. So we didn't hear a lot from him because he didn't have a base camp. So he would write letters and have to carry them around with him until he got in touch with somebody, maybe part of the part of the helicopter team that could take his letters, the evacuation team, take his letters to a camp and mail them. So one day we were sitting in the living room and there was a knock at the door. And my mother went and opened the door, and here was this guy in a full uniform. It was his way of saying, you know, I'm not somebody bad. You can trust me. And he said, hi, my name is Sergeant Love, and I saw your husband, and he saved my life. And I just wanted to let you know that he's okay, because we hadn't heard from him already for like 4 weeks, 3 weeks. And at that time, my mother had turned completely gray because my brother had also been sent to Vietnam in a tank battalion. Well, it turns out he was in intelligence. So he was keeping tracks of my father, and he would let my mother know in letters that my dad was okay. So it turned out that Sergeant Love was on reconnaissance of some kind with his buddy. They always went in buddies. And the VC attacked them. And he was shot in the lung. He was shot in the foot. I think he was shot in the side. His buddy was shot in the hand and somewhere else, I think the shoulder. Well, the buddy realized quickly that his name was John Love. John was bleeding to death and he couldn't run. The VC were going to capture him. So John buried him under debris, covered it all up so well that you couldn't even see it. And John was underneath the debris. He could hear the VC walking on the leaves, and he knew they were right above him, and he passed out because his lung had collapsed. And because his lung had collapsed, his breathing was so shallow, they couldn't hear him. Well, his buddy ran to a mountain yard compound, and they were a village, and each village spoke a different language, and they all had different customs. So it was very difficult. Mountain yards then sent somebody to where my dad was, because they all knew what everybody else was doing. Told him my dad got the Chinese battalion together, his group, and they went out and they found the buried Sergeant Love and got him evacuated out. And then he was standing on our doorstep saying, yeah, your dad is fine, and this is how he's living. And so before my dad went to Vietnam, one of his favorite foods was rice. He would eat rice all the time. If there was leftover rice in the refrigerator, he would put cinnamon and nutmeg on it and milk and raisins and eat it cold. He ate rice all the time. When he came back, he wouldn't touch it. He would not touch it. He said, whatever you do, don't put rice on the table. And I said, why, Dad? This is just, you used to love rice. Well, why do you not like it now? And he said, because when I look at it, I see monkey hands. And I was like, okay, I'm not eating it anymore either. No.
Wow. So your dad comes back finally. He has severe PTSD, which at the time was not recognized. It was considered battle fatigue or whatever the case was. You had some stories of things that he did and how your mother helped him. Would you share one of those?
Yeah, actually, I didn't even put them together until probably like 5 years ago, when I actually had PTSD after going through chemotherapy and radiation twice and like 21 surgeries. And I came down with white coat syndrome, which I was like, what? Who comes down with white coat syndrome? And I didn't realize it until my husband got sick, and I took him to the emergency room. And when we were sitting in there, the doctor walked through, and I ran into the bathroom and threw up. And I thought, well, maybe it was just coffee or something. I don't know. I don't know why suddenly I got sick. I wasn't even nauseous before. So I came back out, and Peter was sitting there in the chair going, are you okay? And I said, yeah, it must have been the cream in the coffee or something. I don't know. And so the nurse came and got us. And we went in and sat down, and I'm looking all around. Every time I'd look around, I'd feel a little nauseous. And I thought, well, that's just because I kind of, already threw up. The doctor walked in the room. I took one look at him, ran over to his sink, threw up, realized I had white coat syndrome, and ran out of the hospital and stood in the parking lot. So eventually my husband came out with some medicine for him, and he goes, the doctor was like kind of shocked, and I told him what you're going through, and he thinks you have white coat syndrome. And he's willing to write you a prescription. I've got it right here for Ativan if you need it. And I'm like, I don't want to take drugs. And then suddenly I remembered my dad. When he had come back from Vietnam, he would have such horrible nightmares, and he slept. In order to go to sleep, he could not go to sleep unless he had this huge knife under his pillow. He just couldn't do it. It was like his baby blanket was his big knife. So he slept in a separate room, and we had to keep the door closed. You had to knock on the door before you went in if he was asleep. You did not walk in there. And so one night I woke up, and at this time, we were back in Bad Tolz. We were back in Bad Tolz. Yeah, back in Germany. And I heard this noise. I heard my mom saying, shh, shh, there, it's okay, it's okay. Now, at this point, I was in high school, so I knew you did not burst in on your parents in the middle of the night when you heard noises, because chances are they were having a good time. So I'm listening, and I'm going, that doesn't sound like a good time. So I got out of bed, and I snuck around, and I looked in, and my mom was on the floor. My dad was on the floor. And it looked like my dad was awake. My mom was awake because she went like this to me, and she looked frightened. So I just stood there and I didn't move. And my dad said, they're right over there. They're right over there. And he had his knife. And my mom said, they're passing over us now. They're going right by. See, they're going right by. They're gone. John, they're gone. It's okay now. You could put the knife away. They're gone. He put his knife away, climbed back up into bed. She tucked him in and left the room, grabbed me, and said he was having another nightmare. So she heard him yelling and screaming in the bedroom, went in, got into his dream with him, because if he had gotten out of the apartment running around with a knife, he probably would have been shot.
That's right.
So, and that happened a lot with a lot of the special forces. Their wives, the ones that survived the marriage after Vietnam, learned from the other wives. You get in the dreams with them, and you help them, and you get them to talk and talk and talk. And so my mom told my friend's mom, who told my friend's dad, who was special forces, and they got my dad, and he talked and he talked and he talked, and the PTSD went away. So I remember when a friend of mine was going through crisis, my dad said, if you can get him to talk, just talk, even only to himself in the mirror, he can work through it, because nobody knows you better than yourself. So when this happened to me, I stood in front of the mirror and I started talking and talking and talking, because I was curled up on the bed in my house, afraid to wear a white shirt, afraid to look at the lines on the highway, they're white, afraid to look at white buildings, afraid to look at a piece of paper. I would throw up. I was afraid to go. Peter said to me, let's go to the movies. It's dark in there. And I looked at him, I said, yes, but the popcorn is white. So after I sat and talked to myself in the mirror, gave myself permission for my body to act out, gave myself permission to go through what I was going through. After about 5 hours of talking to myself, which took a lot, because at first I didn't even want to look in my own eyes. I was so ashamed of my body for turning on me that it took that long to finally be able to look into my eyes, which are the windows to my soul. And I worked my way through it, just like they did. And now I'm fine. I went to the movies. I ate popcorn again.
You moved on. Wow. Those are incredible stories. Just incredible. Now, your dad died of from an Agent Orange related illness, and you were with him at the end. If you're comfortable, share what your last conversation was.
Well, I remember when at first it took forever to find out that what he had was bone cancer, because the doctors, the civilian doctors, and my dad was retired at that point, kept saying, oh, you just have locked shoulders, which a lot of the elderly get. Turned out he had bone cancer throughout his whole body from Agent Orange. It was Agent Orange related, and we finally got him to the correct doctors. And I remember it was bad. It was moving very quickly. And at that time, he was up on Cape Cod with me because when he didn't feel well, my mother had already passed. I said, come up here, stay with me until you're feeling better. I don't want you to be alone. So he came from Florida up to Cape Cod. And when we realized, and he brought his cats with him, he had 2 Siamese cats. And I realized, he said, I want to go home. I want to go back down to Florida. I want to go down there. But the bone cancer was so bad, he couldn't sit really well for any length of time. So I made arrangements using a stretch limo that he could lie on to get him to Boston. And then we went first class so that the chairs would go back and he could lie down and we could take the cats on with us. And when we got down to Florida, we landed in Tampa to get to Beverly Hills, Florida. It was a very long ride. So I got another limo to take us to a hospital where they could check him out and I could get him to good doctors who could follow up and follow him. And one of the places they put him in immediately was hospice, not to die, he didn't die, but to get him regulated on his meds and handle his pain. And they put the American flag right outside of his room. They were just wonderful. And it got him stabilized and he went back home and to his house. And I remember the end was very close. It was very, very close. And I was holding his hand and he said, you know, babe, I never thought I would die of old age. I always thought I would die in service to my country. And I said, Dad, you are. You're dying of Agent Orange. You are. And believe it or not, gave him peace of mind. For him to die of old age was like he hadn't done a good job. But to die of Agent Orange in service to his country, he could live with that death. He could live with that one.
I was a medic in the military, and I heard similar type stories. I want to die with honor. I don't want to die from old age. I don't want to get, this is what my life is, and this is how I want to live, and this is how I want to die. It's amazing, amazing story. Now, as a child of a Special Forces hero, what last words do you want to leave with the viewers around the world?
You know, I remember when my dad came back from Vietnam and I had seen Apocalypse Now, I think it was, and it just scared the bejabbers out of me because I wanted to go see what was going on in Vietnam. And when I saw that, I thought, this is horrible. This is horrible. And I made my dad watch it. I made him watch it, go and see it. And I said, all of the Special Forces guys in this movie are covered with blood all the time. They've got blood on their hands. And he goes, what? And I said, yes, you've got to watch this movie. And when he came out, he said, no. He said, the men I worked with and the men I knew in Special Forces. He said, these other battalions, I don't know that much about them, except that they were very young and they were not trained and they did go a little bit crazy. He said, but all the Special Forces I worked with, he said, when we were faced in a situation like that, we would reach up onto our lapel, we would squeeze our Special Forces pin and remind ourselves, we are the good guys. We don't do this. And so I would leave all of our listeners with that our Army is one of the best armies in the world, not just because of their training, but because of their values. And you can't train somebody with values, because when the going gets rough, they revert to what they truly are. And our military is the best in the world. And the other thing that I would leave them with is what he said with his dying words. And I remember I was riding horses over in Germany. I went to a riding school and I was doing hunt saddle on little tiny postage stamp. And I was riding a very large horse who had a mind of his own. And you don't want 1,200 pounds telling you no when you say jump. And I was afraid. And my dad said, look, you don't have to worry, babe. Until it's your time to die, you're not going to die. And when it is your time to die, nothing is going to let you live. So just live until it's your time to die. And don't be afraid, because fear will get you in more trouble than anything else. And so that's what I'd like to leave the audience with. Live. Don't fear death. It'll come when it's supposed to come. And until it does come, live.
Absolutely. What a great message. We're just about out of time, folks. I want to thank my very dear friend, Kanavos, for this story, which is just so compelling and so moving. Now you can see her story and stories from several other veterans, and both men and women, from parents and from children and supporters of the military, in the book that's coming out March 29th. March 29th, mark your calendar. You can see this on ROKU TV or on my YouTube channel, which is also named Frank Zaccari. If you go to YouTube, please subscribe. And let me leave you with this, as I do every week. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Kat showed us where many of those rocks are. Join us again next week for another life-altering event. Kat, thank you so much.
Thank you.